The topic is relevant. It's relevant not only to the class, but I think it's very applicable in the conversation that you could potentially be hearing on the news media if you're paying attention, but certainly with what would be considered an interdependent world that we are currently living in, and could be moving into more of an interdependent world, or could be essentially protecting ourselves from those interdependencies. And when I say interdependent, what I mean is that it's no longer the case that our local economy affects us solely. And our national economy certainly impacts our pocketbooks, our personal pocketbooks. And it's beginning to be the case that our, let's say, globalized economy and supply chains impact our personal pocketbooks. And because of digitalization and because of the ability to do business internationally, we are dependent on a lot of countries to make sure that their supply chain is in order and to ensure that we get our products and services on time and within a certain cost. And we'll unravel that a lot. And I think that hopefully, with a little bit of prepping, meaning I'm going to prime you with some content to get you to think about the conversation. Then we'll have a group discussion. We won't break out into breakout sessions tonight. And then what I was hoping that we'd be able to do, which I know is going to be fascinating. I listened to a debate about 3 weeks ago, and I was hoping in some way or another I could manufacture it into this class. And tonight's tonight because it really is debating this subject called protectionism. And I'll define that in detail in a little bit. And what protectionism is this concept of being able to protect our local industries and our local economy from international threats. And a lot of times, from what I understand, politics, economics, and trade certainly play factors into relations within countries. And without a doubt, they instigate potential wars. And currently, right now, it's fair to say, and not that I am saying this factually, but we're in somewhat of a trade war with China, and we've sort of been in a little bit of a difficult relationship with China for a multitude of reasons, both good and bad. I mean, we are certainly dependent on a lot of things that the Chinese companies make and produce that Americans tend to consume and enjoy very much so, and it provides us the quality of life that we have. Yet at the same time, there are certain, let's say, malpractices that Chinese companies do in order to steal intellectual property. They don't necessarily abide by the same rules and regulations that I think most of you in this class would probably agree are natural rights or human rights for people to be paid a certain amount of wages, to have decency within the work environment, to be treated well and fair. And also, without a doubt, they're ran by a communist government. So the government controls a lot of these industries for the interest, not necessarily of shareholders and stakeholders that we have been talking about in this class, but really for interest in the Chinese Communist Party. And because of the reality of being a democracy and having the conflict of potential communist powers on the international stage, it it messies the waters a bit because in a sense we're by being consumers in the United States and falling into this trap called consumerism because we like our stuff and we like our products and we like them to be cheap and of quality, which is completely understandable. And capitalism really draws out those concepts. We are funding countries that do not have our same values. And it's so awesome to have this conversation tonight because you know what values are. You know that what culture is. You understand the importance of value and culture when it comes to behaviors. And when you think about it, in your own personal life, if you realize that a certain corporation was not operating in an ethical, value-driven way, you have a choice, you have a vote with your dollars. Do you choose to buy from them or not? And if you, let's just say, had a story coming out that these oranges from the orange company, I don't know what orange company it is, they decided that they were going to start injecting some sort of pesticide that is prone to having cancerous outcomes, and they have diagnosed X amount of people with dangerous life-threatening cancers because of the consumption of these oranges. You knew that, and you had a choice between this orange and the other orange. You would probably choose the orange that doesn't have cancerous issues. So if you're voting with your dollars, my point, I mean, you perked up when I said that certain oranges have pesticides that could potentially cause cancer. And if that is true, and that is a news headline, and that wouldn't be something that you would not expect in the dealings of capitalistic companies, then what would you do? You would likely, I'm assuming, Jennifer, you would choose to purchase a different orange, right? Look at the United States and look at another country that is relevant to you. And you would hope, you would think that the leaders of that nation would want to advocate for their population, their economy, to purchase products from a country that is ran with some sort of common value system that we have here in the United States that treats people well, that doesn't inject their oranges with cancerous pesticides, this kind of stuff. So that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to frame the conversation tonight and give a bit of a perk to your interest that we can unravel these complex topics and really talk about the ethical nature of some of the current political decisions. And when we look at the debate, we're going to look at the debate between people who have a strong advocacy for free trade and globalization. Free trade, globalization, one particular nation has a comparative advantage that can do something better. Therefore, everybody should buy it from that nation. And we should have some sort of comparative advantage in the US. That's usually services, finance, the entertainment industry. We have a good agricultural outsourcing. We export a lot of our agricultural products. So we should just focus on that. Yet there are some flaws in that argument. And then the protectionist argument says yes, we should trade with countries that are advocating similar values that we have, but we should absolutely cut off and isolate countries that do not abide by those values. And we should protect those, say, certain types of manufacturing or certain types of agricultural, certain type of natural resource production within our own country so that we are prepared when, say, COVID-19 hits or when wartime hits, that we can create these products and we have control over these resources to produce in difficult times. So that's, I guess, the general gist and the general takeaway of that debate between free trade and protectionism. And as I'm sure you can understand, the protectionist types and the global nationalist types, meaning we're protecting our nation and solely our nation, are advocating in these days for tariffs, which is essentially a tax on imports from certain countries that do not abide by the same ethical standards that we abide by, and going to be kind of open with it. And it's not about the global economy. It's about the ethical nature of international business and why it's so important for you all as students to be aware of what's happening within the global economic environment so that when you're thrust into, or possibly you're thrusted into it right now, these ethical decisions and you're working for certain companies, you should look to see what their stance is on these important topics of free trade, protectionism, how we treat our workers, the humanitarian rights, caring about the environment, these kinds of things. Certain companies, it means nothing to them. It doesn't matter. It's about shareholder wealth. And so here's what some of them do. Just for example, it's called cultural relativism, and we've talked about that in the past, where a United States company would go over to, say, Iran, or let's just say India, and even though in countries like Iran and India, they have cultures and values that are completely different than the U.S. Let's say they treat women a certain type of way, and they're more patriarchal. Let's just say that's the case. In the U.S., we're sort of trying. I mean, there's a lot of advocacy moving away from fair women rights, women in the workforce, and kind of not dismantling the patriarchy, but just trying to in a sense, uh, address it in the work environment. So in these countries, that is simply not the case. So a U.S. company that says I believe in the U.S. values, will go over to Iran and India and completely dismantle their values and say, oh no, we believe in what you believe, and we're willing to do whatever you guys are willing to do. So we'll conform to your culture, we'll conform to your values simply because we want to open up your market for our business to operate in. And that happens all the time. And the question is what companies are doing that. Why are they doing that? Is that ethical? Is it not ethical? These are some fascinating topics for tonight. So I'll stop with my introduction. I'll pause for any questions, and I will probably spend 45 minutes listening to and debating with the debaters. And the debate is fascinating. It's with a company or an alliance, a forum, an international forum called ARC. It's called Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC. And the people that are debating are, I think there's an Australian uh, economist that maybe that had a leadership role in politics for Australia. He's very, very smart. And there's people from Britain. I think there's a representative from the U.S. and they have very fascinating opinions at a global level as to what we're doing and why. And I think it's gonna. I try to. This is a personal comment. I try to steer away from talking about some of these things with friends and family, only because I really want to talk about it. Like I don't want to just give some opinion or quote some news article that I read or some video that I heard. And if you're like me, if you kind of want to dig deeper into a subject, so maybe you can try to understand it more, so you can be more um, grounded in your opinion, and you'll like tonight's class. I really do believe it because it'll give you some time to kind of chew on the different sides of this pair of conversation, international business conversation, why economics is so important, and sometimes it's the foundation of conflict, which is good and bad, and sometimes it's the foundation of strong alliances. So that's kind of where we're at. So I think it's a custom presentation I drew from a bunch of different sources. So here's an easy visual that you can see that demonstrates the power of how our economy is shifting towards manufacturing and production in a country like China. So this is in 2009. it doesn't have, it says it's a sampling of Fortune 500 companies or Global 500 companies, and you can see the Global 500 companies that are based in the United States and based in China in 2009. So we had 37 of the Global 500 companies based in the United or based in China in 2009, and we had 140 of them based in the US in 2009. So now you can see how these Global 500 companies have some came from the US, some came from other countries, but now they're basing their operations, 119 of them, which is a significant increase than 2009 in China. And you can see that the US has decreased. And China being a communist country, and anybody who has lived in or has friends that have lived in Cuba, they know what it's like to have the government dictate a lot of what it means to be employed, what you can watch, what you can do. There's a book called Animal Farm that apparently is banned from people in Cuba. You're not allowed to. This is still the case, but I had a friend who came from Cuba as a business owner out here, and he really appreciates the political nature of the US because he can do certain things here that he couldn't do in Cuba. So the point is to reference what it's like being under the regime of a communist country and what that could mean for business and what that can mean for your autonomy as an individual. And but the reality is, and Cuba is now today transitioning a little bit more friendly to capitalist theology and being more of a capitalist country. But China has fully adopted this kind of quasi capitalist, quasi-communist country, and they have significantly profited from it. So they figured out a way, and here's the debatable question. When you think of a socialist, communist type of country that can also leverage capitalism, there is some good in that. I mean, the good in that is economic power. I mean, the government of China is clearly doing something right, controlling some of these companies and clearly enticing and attracting companies to come and base their operations within their country. So what are they doing right and why? Here's a fascinating one of my favorite visuals that I have a unique competitive advantage. Every single one of you in this class that is exposed to the culture in Miami and possibly has come from a different country, maybe they have parents that were born in different countries. They traverse around Latin America. They speak two different languages. This is a huge advantage for you in something called the global mindset or in a global economy. Why? Because you have a unique set of values around being open-minded to other cultures. This is a big deal. So the cognitive dimension is really what we're going to be talking about tonight and how this plays into the global mindset. It's knowing about the global environment and global business, mentally understanding how cultures differ and how the ability to interpret complex global changes or have the ability to interpret complex global changes. You've seen it, you're talking about it, you're a part of it. So the cognitive dimension is just knowing this. If you think it's normal to know what it's like to live in, to traverse and to speak two different languages, you're a unique sample of the population, meaning there's some people that are very much grounded in their small town community and they've never left, they've never gone anywhere, and they're not going to go anywhere. And you now have this global perspective or this global mindset because you know what's out there. That's an extremely powerful competitive advantage. The psychological dimension is the emotional and affective aspect that includes a liking for diverse ways of thinking and acting, a willingness to take risks, and the energy and self confidence to deal with the unpredictable and uncertain. There's a lot in that. But a person who has a global mindset is okay with those things. They're okay. They're willing to take risks. They have energy, self confidence, and they're okay dealing with unpredictable and uncertain situations. So I often use this concept of immigration and the tie-in to entrepreneurial success. And there are many scholarly articles too on this ability of being able to venture into the unknown, essentially, which is what an entrepreneur does. Find a way to create value for customers or for employers, and to leverage what you have, whatever it may be, your friends, your relationship, your house, your truck, in order to combine those resources to make a profit. And people who come from a different country and essentially bring their family from a different country and come to the United States have a unique ability to do that because they've already made the number one most important entrepreneurial endeavor you can take is immigrating to another nation. It's unbelievable how powerful that is when leveraged appropriately through the psychological dimension of having that global mindset. Very, very powerful. And then the last thing about having a global mindset is the social dimension. Concerns the ability to behave in ways that build trusting relationships with people who are different from yourself. Think about that. Think about your friends. Think about the college you go to, the diversity of your local church, your local gym, your local whatever it is. There are people from all sorts of different backgrounds, cultures, value systems, and beliefs. And like I mentioned, if you go into, let's just say, a small town of rural Kentucky, that's not the case. Everybody looks the same. Or even a small town in, let's say, even more of a Hispanic prone area, even Miami. If you go to Doral or Hialeah, people that never leave there would only stay there and don't venture out into more of an American assimilated culture, and they only know how to speak Spanish, they never try to learn English, the same thing happens. That they're not being exposed to these different value systems and different beliefs. Okay, so employees who feel pressure to bend the rules in the workplace. Think about an American organization that you might work for or an American company and understand that what we're going through with this ethical conversation, it applies to companies in other countries just as much, if not even more. We're going to look at a map that talks about corruption in, I think it's in public sectors. Public sectors is essentially you get taxes from the public, and whether it's the school system or whether it's a local government, you get taxes from the public, and you see people pay you off in order to get permits, or people try to entice you or court you in order to help you, get something from you, and you fall victim to this. You're corrupted by it. These things happen all over the world in companies, private sector companies, and public sector companies. Here's just a visual of what employees who feel pressure to bend the rules in the workplace. Europe, 23%, they feel pressure to bend the rules. It might be because it's performance based or because everybody else is doing it. It's the social norm. South America is very high, 37%. Compared to Africa and the Middle East, which is more of a collectivist culture, they have less of this individualist inclination to try to compete and perform against other people because they're more of a collectivist. You can see 22%, that's a global median. We're going to talk about the individualist versus collectivist cultures as well. This is a cool map. This is the map I was just talking about. If it's not big enough for you to see, I'll kind of walk through it in a second. So this is perceived levels of public sector corruption. I just explained what the public sector is. These are government institutions, NGOs, non-government organizations that usually get public funding in some sort of way, school systems. Anybody who's funded by taxpayer dollars is usually considered a public sector corporation. And if you look at this heat map, essentially, it says the highly corrupt areas, the 0 through 9, are in darker red. So if you look in areas that are highly corrupt, it's in darker red. And then as you start moving up the map, you see that the very clean tend to not be corrupt. You see Australia over there is kind of stands out. Europe's doing okay. The US is doing all right. Canada's doing great. And then there's certain countries in Latin America that are doing well also. But most of this map, I mean, the glaring, obvious nature of this map, if you look at it, and I don't know how they got these stats, so I can't vouch for the data, but most of the world, this is what the map is saying, is corrupt. So when you talk about, why, Claude, you have to teach this class and why are we learning about business ethics? Well, just take a look at the map and, you tell me why we need to be talking about this kind of stuff. So it runs prevalent. And here's an example of it.
Goldman Sachs' Malaysia subsidiary pled guilty in U.S. court today for violating U.S. money laundering laws and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a law designed to keep companies from bribing foreign officials to do business in those countries.
They could very well profit significantly from standing behind some countries' uh, investment principles. And essentially, Goldman Sachs was unethical in these dealings and didn't do it right, didn't disclose it well, and apparently it was found out, and apparently it didn't bode well for Goldman Sachs. Was it illegal? Possibly not, but it didn't bode well for Goldman Sachs. So here's a chart, and we've talked about capitalism a lot. There are great things about capitalism, and there are not so great things about capitalism. And we have to realize, I want you to understand the history of trade and how trade really goes back to 2000 BC when people are trading natural minerals and wools and furs and stuff like this. Trade has been going on for a long, long time. So there's a capitalistic nature to making something, producing it, and trading it with other people. And in the process of trade, you essentially have to organize in a sense. You have to organize around communities and towns and states and countries in order to create some rules and regulations. And if you think about, there's a company called it's called the British East India Company, which I think had a lot of Dutch affiliation with it. I could be wrong, but this is where governments closely controlled trade to amass national wealth. Corporations like the British East India Company were born, some of the first multinational enterprises. So the government controlled, in a sense, the operational aspects and the administrative aspects of the British East India Company and profited from essentially trading around the world. But also, when I say trading around the world, it exposed stark contradictions in international business and imperialism, slavery, and economic exploitation. And the legacies still go in debates about global inequality today. So this powerhouse of this, imagine 100 ships coming into your area where you're living peacefully with people, and they dock on a port near you, and they come in, they don't speak your same language, but they got huge ships, and you're looking at them like they're gods, like, where did you just come from? And they go into the local population, and they sort of kindly but shrewdly demand that they get some sort of product out of them. And they might offer them something in exchange. And what they do is they'll might set up some relationship or set up some trade routes or whatever and say to the local people, oh, we'll do right by you. If you give us this, we'll do this for you. And then over time, they just overpower them and they could possibly enslave them and be more of an imperialist, meaning just conquer them in a sense. And this happened all the time. And this is what we're talking about here is global trade, like the beginnings of global trade, of people just sort of coming in and creating these authoritarian rules because they have more power, more prestige, more economic influence, and they sort of subordinate an entire town or entire nation. So that's kind of where global trade came from. And so moving to today, obviously a lot has changed, but with the Industrial Revolution and certainly with World War II, things have changed significantly. When we think about global trade, it's not as if there's one particular way it should be because it changes over time. It depends on the dynamics of the world. So I say all this because I want you to see the difference in capitalism at the top and socialism at the bottom. And you can, so if capitalism's at the top, you got countries like the USA in 2016, the USA in the 1950s and 1990s, which is a little bit higher in this capitalist concepts. And as you start moving down this scale, you can get some examples of what other countries were doing as more of a socialist regime and behavioral economics versus rational economics. I'll delineate that in a second. But the difference in capitalism and socialism, the USA in the 1990s versus the USSR could not have been any different. They're on two totally different ends of this map. One is more rational economics and capitalism, and the other one is more behavioral economics and socialism down here in the bottom left. And now you look at China in 2016, which is right here at this part of the map, you can see how they moved sort of away from socialism a little bit, more towards capitalism, and then moved away from behavioral economics and more towards rational economics. It's also known as classical or neoclassical economics. People are rational actors, which is not always the case. People are not rational, they're emotional and it depends. Markets are efficient, meaning that when you increase prices, that demand goes down in perfect correlation. And decisions are consistent and predictable. That's behavioral economics. Sorry, that's rational economics. Yeah, my bad. Rational economics, people are rational actors, markets are efficient, decisions are consistent and predictable. An example is consumer compares prices of two similar products and always chooses the cheaper one if all else is equal. You know yourself, you go to the store, if everything else is equal and you see one product that's a little bit cheaper than the other one, would you choose the cheaper product? Maybe, maybe not. So behavioral economics says acts irrational or emotional, uses shortcuts, heuristics rather than deep analytics, fail to act in their own best interest. Think credit card debt, overeating, or skipping insurance, meaning not using insurance. So behavioral economics actually in the US in 2016 has moved more towards a behavioral economics perspective where people act irrational and emotional. They use shortcuts like heuristics and they fail to act in their own best interest. Where in it looks like the USA in the 1950s and 1990s was more of a rational economics player. And China is still pretty rational. So you see, again, China in the 1940s, US in the 1950s couldn't be more indifferent. And then China is now moving a little bit more. They're seeing the value of capitalism, but they're moving away from behavioral economics and they're using rational economics. They're sort of forcing people into behaving appropriately. That's the whole rational economics claim versus the behavioral economics is understanding that, people are inherently irrational. A fascinating chart. I'm curious, is any questions on this? And because this is a monster, the economic capitalism country differential. One more comment on Sweden. It actually turns out, even though Sweden looks like they're adopting sort of socialism and not as much capitalism, and sort of behavioral economics, which I guess falls in line with what the US is thinking, they're actually doing pretty well. I mean, living, the quality of living in Sweden is great. And also um, like for instance, if they have a baby, they can take a maternity and a paternity leave for like 360 days and they could split it between the husband and the wife. And usually big corporations that are based in Sweden offer this and it's like full pay. And so that there's an example of if you're employed and you're abiding by their laws and their rules and regulations within this country, then Sweden is actually a decent place to live and they adopt more of a socialist perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can apply that to other countries and it works. Like you can't just plug and play socialism. It's not that easy. So, but Sweden seems to be doing a good job making it work.
You,
Yeah, so you're right. So the USSR used to be essentially Russia. I don't know what that exactly stands for, but the USSR was a lot of corruption going on there. There was the gulags and there was these people, many people died under the rule of the communist regime of the USSR, and it's historically fascinating to learn about it under Lenin and Stalin, I think were the two leaders there, and then kind of Gorbachev, you know, like tear this wall down or something like that. He said, but Stalin and Lenin were really the ones that were somewhat of a tyrannical rule there, where the Gulag Capello, I believe, were these camps. They're essentially prison camps or work camps. And the USSR forced people to go and work in these camps if they were ratted out by their fellow neighbors, even family members, for not abiding by the political rule. I mean, free speech was a joke. It never happened. People would say something and they would get arrested and taken away, and their families and friends would never see them again. And they'd be locked in these camps for 6 years and die in enslavement. And that would happen all the time. It was a normal thing in the USSR. So, which was also, I guess, the Soviet Union. So you can see how Russia embraced more capitalism from, I guess it would be, it doesn't say what year, to 2016, and certainly is more rational economics because Russia is still, I'm not sure if they're communist, but they have a strong communist background. I don't think they're strictly communist. Let me take a look. Is Russia a communist? No, modern Russia is not a communist country. Since 1991, when the Soviet Union, USSR, dissolved, Russia transitioned from communism to a federal semi-presidential republic with a capitalist economy. I mean, obviously, they're not communists because they're up here in a capitalism perspective. Capitalism dominates the economy with private ownership and market-based systems. Vladimir Putin's government is not communist. It blends nationalism, state capitalism, and centralized power. So there's some communist component to it with centralized power. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have centralized power; it decentralizes power through legislative, executive, judicial, and in a country like Russia, it's just one central power. Three branches, yeah. Legislative branch, executive branch, and I'm pretty sure it's the judicial branch. Judicial branch, yeah. All right, so fascinating graphic. Now let's talk about cultural value systems. Because if any of you, which most of you have probably visited another country or lived in another country at some point in time, there's this concept which isn't it doesn't sound like a good concept, but it's somewhat normal for people to behave this way. And a lot of I'll take my uncle for instance. I'm not going to name his name, but my uncle doesn't know that he's ethnocentric. He just believes that his country is better than other countries. And I'm not going to say whether or not that's good or bad because hey, fair enough. Like good for you. You're loyal to your country and you believe that your ways and your culture are better than other countries. But that's called ethnocentrism. Natural tendency of people to regard their own culture as superior and to downgrade or dismiss other cultural values. It's some of the comments he makes. Sometimes I can tell that he's ethnocentric. So this guy Hofstede, who I wrote about a lot in a book that I wrote called Deemed Essential, because I compared individualism and collectivism. And Hofstede does a great job talking about these different cultures and sort of grouping them so that we can understand. So he talks about the four dimensions of national value systems that influence organizational and employee working relationships. So we're going to unpack Hofstede's value dimensions, and we're also going to look at this Globe project value dimensions as well, nine dimensions that explain cultural differences. So hopefully this, when you think about this, just think about your experience with other cultures, other people, possibly other families that you know. Just think about some of the things they prioritize and sort of how they act. So are they, here's one of the, I think it's six, one, two, three. It's one of the four of Hofstede's value dimensions. So it's actually, I think there's a little bit more than four. So power distance. What does this mean, power distance? Level of acceptance of inequality in power among institutions, organizations, and people. So in um, countries like Mexico, India, and France, and Thailand, they're okay with power distance. They know that the people up here in the hierarchy, they sort of the people who are a little bit below them that say don't have the nice jobs, maybe they're more labor workers, blue collar type workers, they are okay with other people having more power. They completely think that that's a cultural understanding. They get it. They subordinate themselves to the higher power or the not the higher power, but the power above them, and they respect them. And sometimes in certain cultures, they won't even look them in the eye. They're in their presence. They let's say bow down to them, but it's okay. Like it's okay. You have more power than I do. One day I might work my way up there, but right now I respect you and I respect the power you have. You're okay with that power distance. And there's a strong power distance. There's a good differentiation between someone with not that much power and somebody with more power. And we won't unpack the word power, but think about the countries that do not have a strong power distance. They like more inequality. They're not comfortable with, say, the CEO versus the hourly wage worker that's making minimum wage. And in the presence of the CEO, they feel like they're the same person, and it's not okay to be making $17 an hour when a person's making $20 million a year. They're not as conducive to that power distance. These are countries like Sweden, countries like West Germany, Costa Rica. United States is about in the middle. Like I said, we're moving away. We're moving into more of a humanistic level of work, relationships, more of a flatter hierarchy. You can see some of this trend that's moving away from power distance, whereas Mexico is still very much present. Power distance, totally okay with it. In India, same deal. So that's power distance. And again, this isn't good or bad. It's just different, and it's culturally different. Uncertainty avoidance, comfort level with uncertainty and ambiguity. One of the characteristic traits of leadership is being comfortable with ambiguity. But certain cultures have more comfort with ambiguity than others. And when I mean comfort with ambiguity, unexpected anomalies kind of happen, or some kind of crazy news story comes about, and um, the neighbors running down the street with no shirt on, blaring rap music. Like, that is, whoa, what is that? It's uncertain, and they sort of avoid that. They're like, wait a minute, I don't think I should be around that. So some countries they have a comfort level with uncertainty and ambiguity, and some countries do not like uncertainty and ambiguity. So what countries like it and what countries don't like it? Japan does not like uncertainty and ambiguity. They like facts. France is the same way. Costa Rica is the same way. Countries that are completely okay with uncertainty and ambiguity are countries like Sweden, countries like the United States. We embrace uncertainty and ambiguity. We like this entrepreneurial. If it ain't broken, break it, and then we'll try to build it better. This kind of concept. Uncertainty and ambiguity is considered, being okay with uncertainty and ambiguity is considered to be a strength. Like I said, with leaders, being comfortable with that is a strength. In Japan, that's not the case. In France, that's not the case. Costa Rica, you just don't be an anomaly. Kind of don't do anything unpredictable. Abide by the rules of how we act socially. This kind of stuff. Thailand is about in the middle. Sweden again is totally comfortable with it. India totally comfortable with uncertainty and this kind of stuff. All right, so next one is individualism and collectivism. This is a big one. Individualism is value for a loosely knit social framework in which individuals are expected to take care of themselves. Um, to each their own. There's this invisible hand concept that if I do what's best for me, it's actually good for you. It's this individualist approach to life and to things and to behavior. Versus a collectivist approach was a reference for a tightly knit social framework in which individuals look after one another and organizations protect their members' interests. What countries are more individualistic than others? If you didn't guess already, the United States is number one on individualism. And capitalism, embracing capitalism and embracing individualism tend to go hand in hand. They tend to correlate. The second most individualist country is Australia. The third most individualist country is Sweden, believe it or not. The fourth most individualist country is France. The fifth most is West Germany. So the ones that are more conducive to collectivism are Costa Rica, Thailand, Mexico. You see how Mexico is more collectivist, but they're totally fine with power distance. I think those things kind of correlate a little bit as well. And um, would be another one where it's nine. Thailand, Mexico, where it's seven. Japan, more collectivist. And the last one, I think it's the second to last one, but it's masculinity and femininity. It doesn't mean I'm male or female. It's masculinity and femininity are two sort of personality temperaments that gravitate towards acting a certain kind of way. Masculinity is preference for achievement, heroism, assertiveness, work, centrality with resultant high stress, and material success. That's masculinity. Cultures that propagate masculinity versus cultures that propagate femininity, which would be values relationships, cooperation, group decision making, and quality of life. So let's look to see what countries propagate a masculinity culture and what countries propagate a feminine culture. So masculinity, high on masculinity is Japan. Highest masculinity is Japan. Second highest masculinity is Mexico. Third highest masculinity is West Germany. Fourth highest masculinity is United States. Fifth highest, now we're moving more towards femininity, balancing masculinity and femininity is Australia. Number six, more feminine than masculine is India. And then number seven, definitely more feminine than masculine is France. Number eight, certainly more feminine than masculine is Thailand. Number nine is Costa Rica. And number 10, the country that embraces the most feminine, I'll read it again, values relationships, cooperations, group decision making, and quality of life is the winner is Sweden. So I spent time here because it's fascinating to me to know, again, the cognitive dimension of a global mindset, that culture is a real thing. It changes the way people behave across countries, and it's okay. It's totally. I may not value, let's just say, um, collectivism as much, but it doesn't mean that collectivism doesn't have its merit, meaning it doesn't have its value. And in certain situations, I have to learn to put my individualism behind me. I'm not saying this is fact, I'm just using an example. And I need to embrace a collectivist mindset, at least in certain situations. And certainly when you go to other countries and understanding how they behave, this global mindset is opportune for you to differentiate yourself. Okay, a couple more because I find this fascinating just to see these cultural differences. And this is just a different scale. You think about the word assertiveness, future orientation, gender differentiation, performance orientation, and humane orientation. So let's look at these countries that are, let's say, high on assertiveness. Assertiveness is the extent to which a society encourages toughness, assertiveness, and competitiveness. So I would thrive decently here because I feel like I'm a competitor. I have a competitive nature about me. When I play pickleball, which I just started last week with the faculty members, and I win, I'm like, all right, like it's cool. We have fun because we're competing, and when I lose, I'm like, dang, that stinks. And I'm still having fun, but I'm competitive in nature. Again, I don't mean to use such a silly example, but countries that have high assertiveness, and again, extent to which a society encourages toughness, assertiveness, and competitiveness, Spain, United States, and Germany. And low is Sweden, Switzerland, and Japan. So in Japan, for instance, if I was to say play pickleball with a Japanese professor, and he was like a tenured professor and I wasn't, it would probably be right for me to purposefully lose. You know what I mean? Just like I don't really care. I just want to honor him and to respect him in a sense. And for me to be overly competitive would actually be insulting, and he wouldn't value that. I'm just assuming those are the kind of culture and practice things. And so let's look at future orientation. Future orientation, extent to which the society encourages planning for the future over short-term results. So I know like Japan and even China, they have these like 100-year plans. And in the US, it's like, just the 24-hour news cycle is like all we can sustain. Like, okay, what's going to happen today? Okay, what's going to happen tomorrow? And how about, it's 24 hours is really where future orientation sometimes lies. And that's sort of a joke. But what countries have an extent to which society encourages planning for the future over short-term results? Well, the people who do encourage planning for the future over short-term results are Denmark, Canada, and Singapore. And countries that are more interested in the present or not as interested in future would be Russia, Italy, and Kuwait. Gosh, it's an interesting extent to which a society encourages planning for the future over short-term results. Yeah, there it is. And right in the middle is Slovenia, Australia, and India. Okay, gender differentiation, extent to which society maximizes gender role differences. So women are supposed to do this, men are supposed to do this. These are the occupations women typically do. These are the occupations men typically do. And not just occupation, but roles, possibly household roles, mothering and parenting roles. Gender differentiation, extent to which a society maximizes role differences. So if it's high, it's more of a role difference. If it's low, it's less of a role difference. So the high differences in gender roles would be South Korea, Egypt, and China. Very clear that women do these roles and men do these roles. And low would be in Sweden, Denmark, and Poland, where men and women, it blurs the line a little bit as to what roles they're supposed to play. And right in the middle, you have Italy, Brazil, and the Netherlands. Performance orientation, extent to which society places emphasis on performance and rewards people for improvement. People that are high on performance, this is where the United States comes in, United States, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. I think the individualist aspect is very similar to this performance orientation. And then the countries that are low on the extent to which a society, extent to which they place emphasis on performance and reward is Russia, Greece, and Venezuela. Not as much of an emphasis on performance. And then right in the middle is Israel, England, and Japan. Figured for whatever reason, Israel and Japan would be a little bit more higher, but apparently they are a bit more collective. And I think that this correlates well with the individualist versus collectivist societies. Okay, last one, humane orientation. The degree to which a society encourages and rewards people for being fair, altruistic, meaning not caring about oneself, not doing it for oneself. It's kind of like Mother Teresa as being altruistic, generous and caring, humane orientation. People who are high on that care a lot about encouraging and rewarding people for being fair, altruistic, generous, and caring. And those countries are Indonesia, Egypt, and Iceland. They're high in humane orientation. People who are low, which essentially would be the opposite in a sense, they don't encourage rewards for people who are being fair, altruistic, generous, and caring. They think that that might be weak, or they don't value fairness, altruism, and being generous and caring. Those countries are Germany, France, and Singapore. And right in the middle is New Zealand, Sweden, and United States. Cool. Okay, so this is another chart, and this is about, again, what we're talking about here is we're about to get into a debate between value systems of different countries and how economics plays into this. And hopefully by this time, you can clearly see that certain countries have different cultures and value different things. And so, should economics follow the value systems of countries. Should we do business with countries who do not share our values and have a completely different culture? This is where the debate of protectionism and um, this kind of stuff comes into play. So communication challenges. This is fascinating, and I find this. So I'm Anglo-Saxon American. Grew up in Pennsylvania. I've traveled to Africa, South Africa. I've traveled to Mexico a handful of times, Costa Rica. I've been to the Bahamas. I've gone out of the country on a couple of different occasions, but not a lot. So mostly American um, communication with American people. Of course, I live in Miami too, so that changes things a lot. But I find this to be fascinating because I'll use a Cuban culture, for instance. I believe they're high context. And what do I mean by high context? People are sensitive to circumstances surrounding social exchanges. I use the example often, and I could be wrong, but I'm in a barbershop, and it's a barbershop where most of the people that cut hair are Latin to a degree, but it seems to be that more than 50% of them are Cuban. And I'm sitting there in a chair and I don't know these people at all. But every single one of them, all the people that are in there cutting hair that work there say hello to me. And they come up to me and they give me daps. They're like, hey, what's up, man? And hola, ¿cómo estás? Hey, brother, hermano, ¿qué pasó? And I'm taken aback by it because they care about saying hello to me when they come into the, and I told you in the beginning of class, I think that's cool. And when they are together, say like a Cuban family's together, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I can imagine myself going into the home of a Cuban family. And it's like, if I didn't say hello to abuelo and abuela, and if I didn't, um, present myself as a guest in the home, it's almost like offensive. Like I have to say hello, and the saying hello and saying goodbye process is a big deal. I could be wrong. Maybe you guys can fill in the blank, but that's considered a high context culture. And people send and receive unspoken cues such as tone of voice and body language, in addition to the explicit spoken words when talking with others. They're very sensitive to these things in high context cultures. In low context cultures, people use communication primarily to exchange facts and information. Meaning is derived primarily from words. There's subcultures, and I don't mean to just generalize in Cuban cultures, but there's subcultures within countries that are more high context than others. And there are certainly situations where it's more appropriate to be high context than others. Like for instance, like you go to the hospital to, your doctor and you're Cuban. Like you're not going to do that with all of your patients. And I think that discernment in those circumstances is good. But when you get around other people that they all understand that high context nature and they're clearly okay, so I'll give you another example. Let's ask. Okay, so when you go, lady, when you go to your family's house and say you're tired, you've had a tough day, or maybe you just got an argument with your friend, and you go over to your family's house, are they immediately like, "Hey, what's going on with you? Like, what? Why are you sad?" Okay, so there could be a lot of value in it, obviously. Think about the opposite, that you internalize that and you don't get in front of people, and people see it, but they just pretend like they don't see it. And they just ask, how's your day? You say good, and they move on to a different conversation. So that would be the example of a low context culture. In a low context culture, people use communication primarily to exchange facts and information. That's all they want. And low context is German, Swiss, Scandinavian, North American, which is the US and Canada, English, Italian, Spanish. Now we're moving up to high context. Greek, Arab, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, very, very, very high context. And I was bringing up the Ip Man story. I'm pretty sure it's a Chinese story about Kung Fu. And there was a lot of tension between Japan and China. And I think Japan came in and like conquered a part of China. And the story of Kung Fu is really, really amazing. And the respect that these Kung Fu martial artists had for one another, especially when they were approaching their like dojo or their place of teaching Kung Fu, it was unbelievable. They would stand a perfect distance apart. They would present themselves in such a way, they would look people right in the eye, and they would have this exchange for like 3 minutes. That was like, it was almost perfectly um, robotic in a sense. And it seemed like it came natural to them. And it was just this hello, two or three different things. And they pat each other on the shoulders and they're smiling. They're so happy to see each other. And then all of a sudden they transition. Okay, like, why are you here? So then boom, 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 fact, 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 fact. But they needed to have that high context before they get to the facts. And I think you probably understand that concept, but if you can visualize it, it's incredible when you see it. People say hello. They literally spend 30 seconds to a minute having little passing bygones, the socially acceptable behaviors of how you doing, how the kids, how the friends, what's going on. And then once you get that past you, you can absolutely start talking about the facts. But if you were to be in a high context culture and you'd say hello, and then you'd say, the reason why I'm here is because I need to get a loan from you for $5,000. They would look at you and be like, first of all, absolutely not. And second of all, that's completely rude and offensive that you didn't even ask me how my kids were doing or all this kind of stuff before you asked me for money. Whereas in the US, it's appropriate to go somewhere and be like, hello, how you doing? And then immediately straight to business. So that's just a high context versus low context cultures. The more aware you are of these cultures in the context, the easier it will be for you to operate and function. All right, so here's a fascinating one, somewhat controversial that I want you to watch. I'll speed it up a little bit. It's about 5 minutes. I won't talk too much about it, but you'll get the gist of it. So let me ask some questions. First of all, that's true that I got that out of the book. It's been accredited, and obviously you can see some of the footage he sort of went undercover because I'm sure the business owners probably didn't want him to make that video. But I mean, here's my thoughts of it. Number one, and this is the pro, super efficient, super effective, very low cost. They seem like they're smart, somewhat motivated, working hard. And from a business perspective, I'm like, wow, look at what they've built. Wow, that's incredible. From a humanitarian perspective, you have to say, like, are they doing the right thing? Well, why not? Because the people are willing to come and they're paying them, and it's not like they're forcing them to be there. They're compensating them for their work. But obviously, what it is playing into is the cultural differences as to what's acceptable in China for young people to work within a factory and how that looks, what that looks like, and how much money they make, which is next to nothing, $450 a month for working, what, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, 60 hours a week. That's crazy. And the lifestyle in which they're living versus what we're used to in the US. So you can see the differences between the value systems of these companies that are based in one particular area. And here's the kicker. Because we're consumers here in the US and because we don't want our iPhone to be, $1,500, we're purchasing from that factory. And the parts and pieces and a lot of the aspects of the iPhone that you're carrying today could very well have been put together by people in that factory. So we are contributing in a sense. I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying the US is contributing towards the building and the manifestation and the proliferation of factories like that in China. How could you see it otherwise? So let me ask some questions. Videos from Tech Insider features a university student who went undercover in a Chinese factory producing Apple iPhones. He describes the working conditions and the measures that must be implemented to deter suicide. While Apple is not the direct owner of this factory, it employs their workers, which emphasizes the problem of global supply chain and whether big companies such as Apple can be ethical and can hold their supply chain accountable. So here's a question. Apple outsources hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs to other countries. Why do you think that is? Okay, so let's just say you have how many people are in that factory? Let's say there's 5,000 people. 5,000 people. And you're paying them in China $450 per month. And hours work, I don't know, gosh, 60 hours per week times, let's just say, how many hours work did that be? 60 hours. Let's just say 50 hours per week, which would be 50 hours per week. And then let's just say that's 200 hours per month. So how much is that per hour? It'd be plus 450 divided by this. It's about $2.25 per hour in China. Let's try to back into that just for a second so you guys can see. So how much does it cost them a month in their payroll of those 5,000 people? So you do 5,000 times $2.50 do times $2.50. This is per month times 200 hours per worker. All right, so it costs them $2,250,000 per yeah per month. In the U.S., how much do you think? So this is payroll in China. In the U.S., how much is minimum wage right now? States, it's different. So in Florida, it's $13 per hour, and it's set to increase to $15 in 2026. So next year, minimum wage is going to go up to
50.
$15. So let's
Yes.
say in the cheapest place in the US, your minimum wage, let's just say it's $10 an hour, just for $10 for, let's see the price difference here per hour in the US. So remember, you're paying $2,250,000 in payroll in China, and in the US, you're paying
And
this times, well, let me try to do this again. Maybe plus 5,000 people times 200 hours per person times $10 an hour. And that's not even including overtime, by the way. $10 million. Okay, whoever just did that, great job with the math. And then, so what is the difference? Plus this minus this is
so
every month for, and this is just one factory every month. And how many months are in the year is 12. So every year, by choosing this factory in China over the US, plus it's gonna be this times this, you're saving
wow.
$93 million.
Hmm.
So Why wouldn't, I mean, again, let me remove my emotional caring about other people for a second. Let me put on my strictly capitalist drive profit for shareholders hat. The answer is yes. Like, of course, I'm going to outsource my labor to China. Like, that's an easy decision to make. Yet, is it the ethical decision? That is the million-dollar question when watching that video that I'm trying to demonstrate to you that this is stuff that happens all over the world. And put yourself in the role of worker in the US. So you got an issue because you want a job that makes $10 an hour. Then you have worker in China, you're fine with it. And then you have, let's say, manager or executive at Apple. These are three polarly opposite perspectives. The worker in the US is being completely robbed of opportunity to work for $10 an hour by they'll never compete with that. Never. It just won't happen. And then the worker in China is choosing to do it. So they're actually entering into this contract willingly. So what's their situation look like? And then if you were a manager or an executive at Apple, you're gonna have to make this decision. Do you want to save the company $93 million a year and make shareholders happy and get a nice bonus by the end of the year and keep moving forward and living in your nice bougie town with your Range Rover? That's fine. But if you choose not to make that decision, you'll likely get fired and have to go work at a different company because most managers at Apple would make the decision to save $93 million a year. So again, I'm not speaking in truisms or facts. I'm just getting you to think through this concept and why these decisions are being made in factories like that. Okay, next question. So I asked the question, why do you think it is? And I think we answered that. So discuss the types of issues that can be found in a far-reaching international supply chain. So what are some other issues besides what we just saw that could be found in a supply chain from different countries? What's a supply chain? In the end, I saw someone in this chat put manufacturing. It is the raw materials essentially are going to be on a farm somewhere because you have to get the cotton and the wood and all this kind of stuff. They have to somehow get into a factory, and that factory needs to turn those raw materials into a product of sorts. And that product, wherever that factory is, then needs to be boxed up, shipped out onto a truck and possibly onto a freight. And then that freight needs to be either trained or bused or trucked or even ferried on a boat over to wherever it's going. And then it needs to dock. And then at the dock, it needs to be unloaded, getting onto another truck, and then it needs to be delivered to a distribution facility. And at that distribution facility, it then needs to be again trucked or picked up in some way or another and delivered to your door, which is that's new for us as American consumers, or delivered to a store, and then you have to go to the store and pick it up. I mean, there's a lot going on in there. Yes, middlemen is one. There's plenty of middlemen. So that chain, when you think about this concept called blockchain, what that's doing is it's actually tracing those steps and it's making sure there's transparency through those steps. So I ask again, what are some issues that can be found in a far-reaching international supply chain? You talk about boats and trains and trucks. What if there's cockroaches that are doing little cockroach poops all over your clothes? How would you know? Are they inspecting these things? Particular example. But so now you're getting to it. Do they have human right violations? Do they have child labor violations? Do they have poor working conditions? Irresponsible sourcing? Are they getting, okay, so you're in a coffee business and you receive a shipment and you make the coffee. Let's say you ground the coffee and then you package it and send it out. You get the coffee beans and you just bought like $1 million worth of coffee beans. And you notice that these particular coffee beans they have like a rank odor to them. But when you grind them up, it's fine. But there's something wrong with the shipment of coffee beans. But whatever, who cares? Just grind them up and put them in the bag and send them off. It's just another shipment of coffee beans. Why does it matter? So that's just irresponsible sourcing of product. Now we're getting to the point where we're talking about some of the clear issues in far-reaching international supply chains. Far-reaching means there's many different people touch it from all over the country. When you have many different people that touch it from all over the country, you got a problem. One of the people that I think is really good at this, and I think it is, and this isn't the case with other companies, but it has worked out for him because of his branding, because of his corporate culture, whatever it is. It's Howard Schultz. He does a great job explaining in his book. I highly recommend this book. I think it's an amazing one. And he talks about how he essentially Starbucks was about to go bankrupt, not doing well at all. And Howard Schultz was one of the founders or the founder, grew the business over time, and then he kind of handed the reins off to another CEO, and bad things happened, and then he had to step back in as the CEO, and he talks about that story. In 2008, Howard Schultz decided to return as the CEO of Starbucks to help restore its financial health and bring the company back to its core values. Core values. And what he was able to do was so one of the things Starbucks did, and he details it in his book, is they source their beans from farmers and farms and they ensure that the farmers are paid well, they have great working conditions, and they pay retail price for these coffee beans. They pay their farmers well for their product, and they ensure that with paying them well, they obviously have some sort of contractual agreement, and they educate them, they grow with them, they partner with the farmers as opposed to just sourcing the cheapest beans of best quality from anywhere in the world. They have sort of a standard in which they want to source their beans, and their standard doesn't include just quality coffee beans at a cheap price. It includes much more than that. And this is a great book where Howard Schultz details his practices. It doesn't work for all companies, which is the sad part. I mean, what it does is it makes it more expensive. And if you don't have the ability to afford or compete at that level, you're going to be in big trouble. Not all companies are like Starbucks. All right, a couple more slides, and I want to get to this debate. These are just charts, factual charts that I wanted to present to you. So take as you wish with them. I'm pretty sure you're seeing my screen. Yes. So what this says is a comparison between countries and corporations based on gross domestic products and revenues. What this means is that there's certain countries that have a gross domestic product, which is production, essentially, how much of these the country producing, have the same amount of gross domestic product as the company. And this is supposed to demonstrate to you the power, and this is where the ethical concept comes in, and this neo-capitalism, where you're taking these huge companies like Walmart, Date Grid, BP, I think that's British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, Volkswagen, Apple, monster organizations that are essentially producing the same amount of GDP revenues as certain countries. So you can see Argentina versus Walmart is the same amount. As much as Argentina puts out there, Walmart puts out the same amount. Then you have Ireland, and you have one company is creating the same amount of production as Ireland. Malaysia, Royal Dutch Shell is same amount of production. So it's supposed to demonstrate or show you the power that these organizations have. And when you have a multinational organization like Walmart, Walmart affiliates itself, it pays a lot of tax dollars in the US, but it's really a multinational corporation. It's based in many, many different countries all over the world. It doesn't have one particular country that they're ethnocentric towards, that they're saying this is our base country. They're really a global company. And this global company has the power of a whole country when it comes to production. That's a big deal. And it's a big deal. Number one, is that right? Is that okay? And number two, what if they didn't? Walmart has a tremendous amount of economic clout, meaning they provide for families, they provide for communities. I shop at Walmart. They have, best prices every day. They deliver a ton of value to customers, and they employ a ton of people at the same time. So if you were to say regulate the way that Walmart does business, because you're going to have a protectionist mentality, if you follow me, what that's going to do is going to force Walmart to lay people off. If you think about in Florida, the minimum wage is going to go from like $12 to $15, or yeah, I think $15 next year. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs because of the increase in minimum wage. Why do you think that is? Minimum wage increase is good, right? It's a trade-off. Yes, you want people to get paid more, but in order for them to get paid more, the company has to take that extra expense and they have to pick it from somebody. And what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to take their best employees who are producing more. They'll bring them up to $15 an hour, and they're going to have to work harder in their job and produce more and possibly learn automation, because they can't afford to keep that many people, because the shareholders and the profit mongrels in the company, they just won't deal with it. And candidly, it could put a big company with a ton of labor, it could put them out of business. Increasing $2 an hour minimum wage isn't always a good thing for the general economy. It's a good thing for certain workers, for sure. It's a good over time that wages increase, but to have such a drastic change could actually have unintended consequences. It's always a trade-off, is what I'm trying to say. That's what economics is about trade-offs. Let's go to the next one. United Nations Global Compact. So the UN is really a conglomerate of individuals and countries that have gotten together and said, now that we have this global economy, what are we going to do? How are we going to police this thing? They talk about human rights. They have 10 principles here. Principles around human rights, where they've decided that this is a principle that the United Nations countries should abide by. Not all countries are in the UN. Principle one, businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. What are the internationally proclaimed human rights? We'll talk about that in a minute. Principle two, make sure that they are not complicit in human right abuses. Complacent is they are not ignoring it. They're not apathetic. They make sure they enforce consequences when people abuse human rights. Labor, principle three, businesses should uphold the freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. That's like unions. Principle four under labor, the elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor. Principle number five, the effective abolition of child labor. Not okay. Principle 6, the elimination of discrimination and respect of employment and occupation. No discriminating in the workplace, and you respect people that are employed and occupied within your organization. Environment. Principle 7, businesses should support a precautionary approach to environmental change challenges. Principle 8, undertake initiatives to promote greater environmental responsibility. Principle 9, encourage the development of and diffusion of environmentally friendly technologies. And anti-corruption. Principle 10, businesses should work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. From what I understand, I teach a couple students that are from Mexico, and they have explained to me that you don't get business done in Mexico unless you bribe people. Even the police is just a part of the culture. Bribing is how you get things done. There's a couple examples in the book. This chapter would be a fascinating chapter. They have a couple cool cases. One of which was this Alibaba and its competition with Amazon, and how say China doesn't even use Amazon, but Alibaba's got like 600 million active users, and they're dominating in a lot of ways this digital shopping market. And Amazon, because say it's like an American company, or because Alibaba is so powerful, they are competing pretty hard in the space of this online trade market. Very fascinating case. If you haven't picked a case yet, that would be one to look at. And then another one is, um, what was the thing? It talks about bribery. It has this guy as a situation where he is employed within an organization, and he's trying to get permits from a different country, and the permit office in this different country says, okay, no problem, I could probably get this done for you, but I'm going to need you to, pay me a little bit more in order to get this done. He brings that to his boss, and she says, go ahead and pay the extra amount of money because we need to get this project done. He starts to do that over and over again, and he actually gets promoted. He starts making 3 times as much as he was making when he first started, and he does it like over 2 years. And he was in cahoots with his boss, so they just did it. They just paid this person extra money in order to get the permits, in order to get the business done, in order to run the project smoothly. And then eventually somebody came in and investigated the transactions, and basically was going to do a full investigation into the bribery that was happening. And the people started freaking out. And now you have a decision to make. Do you come? The boss said, bury all the evidence, tell the lady not to talk to anybody. When they come to you and ask questions, lie to them, because if you don't lie to them, we get caught, we can face prison time. And then the other alternatives was come out and tell the truth. And this is a serious issue. And the conflict is, well, if that's how they operated in Mexico, and we needed to get things done in Mexico, whatever the country's cultural norms is bribes, then why is that a bad thing? That's the cultural relativism thing. Is in our culture, yeah, we don't want to bribe people and pay them off to get things done. But in other countries and other cultures, that's just what happens. That's how we get stuff done. And the fact that I was able to conform to that culture and get things done demonstrates that I'm good at what I do. Individualist, performance based, all this kind of stuff. Yet you could go to jail for this, and you can get fired for it. So it's a difficult situation. Global business ethics and legal issues, code of conduct, U.S. antitrust, mutual respect. These are important issues. Proper use of computers, insider trading, financial integrity, confidentiality, records management, labor and employment law. Best practices for compliance guidelines, the development of clear policy against FCPA violations. Remember, you guys created a code of conduct. This kind of fits into this. Support by senior management for the company's compliance policy, the development of standards and policies relating to the acceptance of gifts, hospitality, entertainment, expenses, customer travel, political contributions, charitable donations and sponsorships, facilitation, payments, solicitation, and extortion, the development of compliance procedures that include risk assessment and internal controls, annual reviews of compliance procedures and updates when needed, the development of appropriate financial and accounting procedures. These are all things that are best practices for compliance guidelines. This is how we do things here. And the FCPA is the organization that does that. So these are 10 corporations violating the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So what this act basically does, basically gave power to the government. And this is kind of does the government deserve to be able to come in, and I guess it's Keynesian versus Friedman. The government should hold the right to intervene within an industry when they believe that there's a monopolistic tendency happening, when companies are getting too big, when they're taking advantage of customers, when there's price gouging, all this kind of stuff. Then the government should be able to go in and intervene and break up the company, or get in the way of mergers and acquisitions, this kind of stuff. So that's what the Sherman Antitrust Act is all about. And companies that were essentially sued for things that they could have been doing that could create these monopolies, or create these pricing conflicts of interest, essentially, and to try to protect consumers. Citicorp got sued, Barclays got sued, JP Morgan got sued, F. Hoffman, it looks like a real estate, or it's a vitamin company, F. Hoffman, La Roche, Yaz Key Corporation, Bridgestone Corporation, the Tire Corporation, and the product at the Tire Corporation was the anti-vibration rubber products for automobiles. And the country in which they were operating in, you can see over here to the right. But these are just examples. The reason why I put this on here is so you can see that this stuff is happening. companies are getting in trouble. The government is intervening and has intervened. And these are just some examples where, whether you believe in it or not, have happened. I think this is one of the last charts, and then we'll watch the debate. Global challenges threatening business, national and corporate cybersecurity. So I'm going to slow down on this because it pegs into the debate. There are challenges that are threatening the economic vitality of the US. And the economic vitality of the US is very important for all of us because of our currency, because of our investments. We want to have, say, global power, but we want to be the world's currency. That's very important to us. We want people to buy our bonds, our treasury bonds from the US government, because we want them to have faith in our economy. There's a lot of things, I won't get into the economics of it, that are really good to have strong business and economics here in the US. And there are things that are threatening that. One of the things that's threatening that is national and corporate cybersecurity. So people are stealing things from using technology and throwing in just they're breaking into our house, essentially breaking into our databases and breaking into our data mines and stealing stuff. Hackers from all over the world. Technology induced job loss. So these are ways that jobs are being automated. People don't need to do certain jobs that they've done in the past, and this is a problem. And it's threatening businesses all over the world. These are global threats. Income inequality and social safety nets. The more AI and tech-based and service-based and moving away from manufacturing and towards artificial intelligence, that factory that you saw in China, a lot of those people say we're living in poverty. They may not even have a job if artificial intelligence or robotics takes their job. And then what? You know what I mean? Of course, maybe the jobs will shift. I'm a big proponent of innovation actually brings more jobs. That just changes the landscape of jobs. But the reality is the income um, disparity, the discrepancy between the people who are making the least amount of money and the people who are making a lot of money is going to even grow wider with these global challenges. Hmm. Ethics of AI. This is the class we're talking about today. I mean, we haven't really talked about AI yet. Hopefully we will at some point, but um, people are using artificial intelligence unethically, stealing proprietary information, or what is it called? Copyright infringement. Climate change obviously is on this list as well. And global principles for ethical conduct. All right, cool. So, global principles for ethical business conduct. I'm just going to read them. Just think about this. Require accountability and transparency in all relationships. Number two, comply with the spirit and intent of all laws. Number three, build trust in all stakeholder relationships through a commitment to ethical conduct. Number four is be mindful and responsible in relating to communities where they are operating. Engage in sustainable practices to protect the natural environment, provide equal opportunity, safer and fair compensation for employees, provide safe products, and create value for customers. So it would be wonderful if all organizations in all countries, in all cultures, and all value systems all over the world abided by and agreed to these things. The reality is, if you are competing, some of these things are a little bit more costly. And sometimes it's always tempting to circumvent the rules and the principles and to conduct yourself unethically. And who's policing that? Who's the global world trade police force? Right now, it's the UN in some way or another, or the World Trade WTO, World Trade Organization, is another one, and you got the International Monetary Fund. So there are organizations in place to do this, but are they policing it? And can it be policed? So these are the questions that go into the free trade debate versus protectionism debate. I wish we had more time to kind of talk through what we just said, but let's watch the debate. I'm going to pause it. And I'm going to ask a series of questions during the debate. So we'll go right into it. Okay, so you can see in that debate that it looks like the protectionist argument and poll share results with you all was stronger in that debate. But in a class, let me see if I can pull this up. Give me a second. Ugh, protectionism stronger. Okay, so let me take this screenshot here. It's right here. Okay, so in the class, you can see the vote in the beginning of class. I don't know if you can see my screen. You could see my results, both of them. But in the beginning of class, we had 47% of the people said yes, protectionism makes us poor. 53% of the people said no, protectionism doesn't make them poor. I don't know if everybody understood the question correctly, but it's a clear shift. So people are saying they're shifting more towards free trade after hearing that argument. But 7 out of 27 people still believe that protectionism is good. So that's fascinating. Um, Closing comments. I think that the story of globalization, it's not linear. It advances, it retreats, it transforms. You have this thing called the Silk Road, which was a long time ago, where people would just be able to trade. This is hundreds of years ago. Now we have digital payments across continents. International business really has shaped the way we live, the way we think, and the way we relate to people. huge advancements in the last 20 years, some good, some not. So just some questions to leave you with is how can we globalize responsibly? This is an important question. What values should guide cross-border partnerships? And how do we uphold human dignity while pursuing innovation and profit? Ethical international business isn't just about compliance, it's about conscience. So making smart ethical decisions.